I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. The gym was a place where I could clear my mind, a sanctuary of routine and discipline. I went every evening after work, following the same schedule without fail. I had my preferred spot in the locker room, a row that was usually empty, except for a few scattered gym goers. It was comfortable, familiar, and free of unnecessary distractions. At least that was how it used to be. One night, after finishing my workout, I walked into the locker room and found someone standing directly next to my usual locker. It was strange, considering the row was mostly empty. I did not think much of it at first, assuming it was just a coincidence. I went about my routine, changing quickly and leaving without giving it another thought. The next evening, the same thing happened. The same person stood beside my locker, using the one directly next to mine, despite all the other empty spaces available. A flicker of annoyance passed through me, but I brushed it off. Maybe they had their own routine, just like I did. I told myself it was nothing to be concerned about. But then it kept happening. Every night, without fail, they were there. No matter when I arrived, they always seemed to be just ahead of me, already at their locker as if they had been waiting. The unease in my chest grew stronger with each passing day. I tried changing my routine, arriving earlier or later than usual, but it did not matter. They always adjusted, always ending up right next to me. I started to pay closer attention, watching them from the corner of my eye. They never spoke, never acknowledged me in any way, but their presence was undeniable. They moved with a quiet precision, opening their locker, arranging their belongings, and leaving just as I finished. It felt deliberate, calculated, as if they were mirroring my actions. One night, I decided to test a theory. Instead of using my usual locker, I picked one at the far end of the room. It was inconvenient, out of the way, and nowhere near my preferred spot. I waited, my heart pounding as I watched them enter. For a brief moment they hesitated, their eyes scanning the row. Then, slowly, they made their way over and took the locker right next to mine. A chill ran down my spine. This was not normal. This was not a coincidence. I tried to act natural, focusing on my routine, but my hands trembled as I tied my shoes. My mind raced with questions I did not have answers to. Why were they doing this? What did they want? I felt my pulse quicken, an uneasy weight pressing against my chest. I finished changing as quickly as possible and left the locker room without looking back. As I stepped into the main gym area, I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe it was all just in my head. But deep down, I knew that was not true. The pattern continued for weeks. No matter what I did, they always ended up next to me. It was starting to affect my workouts, my focus slipping as I became more and more aware of their presence. I considered saying something, confronting them, but the idea made my stomach twist. What would I even say? They had not done anything wrong, not technically. Then, one night, something changed. I had just finished my workout and made my way into the locker room, my body exhausted from the effort. As I approached my usual row, I felt a sudden wave of hesitation. I scanned the room, and sure enough, they were there. But this time, they were not alone. They stood in front of their open locker, staring at something inside. Their posture was rigid, their breathing slow and controlled. I moved cautiously, my pulse quickening as I caught a glimpse of what was inside. A notebook sat on the locker shelf, its pages covered in scribbled writing. And there, among the notes, was something that made my blood run cold. A photograph of me. I took a step back, my throat tightening. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Why did they have a picture of me? How long had they been watching me? The questions swirled in my head, each one more unsettling than the last. Before I could react, they closed the locker, their movements slow and deliberate. They turned slightly, their eyes meeting mine for the first time. A small, almost imperceptible smile crossed their lips. It was not friendly. It was knowing. Panic surged through me. I needed to get out of there. My hands shook as I grabbed my belongings, stuffing them into my bag with frantic urgency. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I forced myself to move, to leave before they could do anything else. As I stepped out of the locker room, the air outside felt thick and suffocating. I did not stop walking until I reached the exit, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to get home. I needed to figure out what to do. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photograph, the notebook, the way they had looked at me. I could not shake the feeling that this was far from over. The next day, I made a decision. I would change gyms. It was the only option. I could not keep going back, could not risk another encounter. I packed my things and made the call, canceling my membership without hesitation. As I walked out of my apartment that evening, a strange sense of relief washed over me. This was the right choice. I was putting distance between myself and whatever this was. But as I approached my car, I stopped cold. There on the hood was a single piece of paper. I reached out with a shaking hand, my breath catching in my throat as I read the words scrawled across it. "See you soon." I whipped my head around, scanning the parking lot, but there was no one there. The street was quiet, empty, but the unease in my chest told me I was not alone. I got into my car, locking the doors the moment I sat down. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I tried to steady my breathing. I needed to go, to get far away from here. As I drove off, I could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Story 2. The sound of my own voice drifted from another room, clear and unmistakable. I froze in place, my pulse hammering in my ears as I strained to listen. The words were muffled, but the cadence and tone were undeniably mine. The problem was, I lived alone. There was no one else who could possibly be speaking in my voice. I took a cautious step forward, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The logical part of my mind struggled to come up with an explanation. Maybe I had left the television on, though I could not remember turning it on at all. Perhaps it was a recording of myself playing on my phone, but my phone was in my pocket, untouched. The voice continued, growing clearer as I neared the source. It was coming from the spare bedroom, a room I hardly ever entered. My throat tightened as I reached for the doorknob, hesitating just before touching it. The voice inside the room sounded exactly like me, speaking in the same rhythm and inflection. The words, however, were still too muffled to understand. I forced myself to open the door, my hands trembling. The room was empty, just as I had left it. There was no sign of movement, no television or speaker that could have been responsible for the sound. Yet I had heard it. I knew I had. Stepping further into the room, I felt a sudden chill in the air. The feeling of being watched crept over me, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. I turned in circles, scanning every corner, every shadow. Nothing was out of place. Everything was exactly as it should be. But something was wrong, something I could not explain. I backed out of the room slowly, closing the door as quietly as I could. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe it had been my imagination, a trick of my own tired mind. I had been working late, sleeping little. It was possible that exhaustion was making me hear things. But as I stood in the hallway, my voice spoke again. This time it was coming from the kitchen. My stomach twisted as dread settled deep in my chest. I forced myself to move, my footsteps hesitant as I made my way toward the sound. The voice was louder now, clearer. It was saying something familiar, something I had said earlier that day. My exact words, repeated in the same tone and rhythm. My lips parted in shock as I listened, my own voice speaking from a room I had not been in since morning. I stepped into the kitchen, my eyes darting around for any source of the sound. The room was empty, silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. My heart pounded as I backed away, the eerie silence pressing down on me. Then, from behind me, my voice spoke again. This time it was close, too close. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. The room was still empty, yet the voice had been right behind me. I could feel the air shift, as if someone had been standing there just a moment before. My hands clenched into fists as I struggled to steady myself. I had to be losing my mind. But then, the voice changed. It no longer echoed my own words, but spoke something new. A single phrase that sent ice through my veins. "I see you." The whisper was so close it felt as though it had been breathed directly into my ear. My legs moved before I could think, carrying me out of the kitchen in a blind panic. My mind screamed for me to run, to get out, to leave this place behind. I reached the front door, my hands fumbling with the lock. But as I turned the handle, my voice came again, calm and eerily confident. "Do not go." I turned slowly, my breath shallow. The house was silent again, the oppressive stillness making my skin crawl. I forced myself to take a deep breath, to think. Running would not solve anything. I needed to understand what was happening. Summoning what little courage I had left, I spoke. "Who are you?" My voice trembled, barely above a whisper. The silence stretched on, suffocating in its weight. I was about to speak again when my voice answered, slow and deliberate. "You." A chill ran down my spine. The word echoed in my mind, twisting in ways I could not comprehend. My legs felt weak as I stumbled backward, my mind refusing to accept what I had just heard. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the presence vanished. The air grew warm again, the house settling into an eerie quiet. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for something more, something else. But nothing came. The next morning I barely remembered falling asleep. The fear from the night before lingered, but nothing else had happened. I went about my day cautiously, waiting for the voice to return. But the house remained silent. Days passed, then weeks. The memory of that night stayed with me, but I convinced myself it had been exhaustion, a waking nightmare brought on by stress. I forced myself to move on, to pretend it had never happened. Then, one night, as I lay in bed, my voice spoke from the darkness once more. I never left. And this time I knew it never would. Story 3. I had always been careful with my house keys. They had their own special place by the front door, resting in a small dish where I could easily find them. Every day, without fail, I would place them there the moment I walked inside. It had become a habit, something I did without even thinking. That was why it was so strange when they suddenly went missing. That morning I had left the house as usual, locking the door behind me. The keys had been in my pocket when I stepped outside, and I distinctly remembered feeling their weight. There was no reason for me to worry about them. I had a routine and I followed it without fail. However, when I returned home later that day, they were nowhere to be found. I checked the usual spot first. expecting to see them sitting in the dish. When they were not there, I searched my pockets, but they were empty. I even looked in my bag, though I had no memory of putting them inside. The absence of the keys made my heart race. I tried to remain calm, telling myself that they had to be somewhere. Retracing my steps, I searched every room in the house. I checked the kitchen counters, the bathroom sink, and even the living room sofa. Each time I searched, my frustration grew. I told myself that I had just misplaced them, that they would turn up soon. But the longer they remained missing, the harder it was to believe. I decided to check outside, wondering if I had dropped them before coming in. The front porch was empty, and the pathway leading to the house was clear. I even checked the grass, thinking they might have fallen without me noticing. No matter where I looked, there was no sign of them. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The more I searched, the more uneasy I became. Losing the keys was one thing, but the fact that they had disappeared so completely was unsettling. I knew I had locked the door that morning. I remembered feeling them in my pocket, so where could they have gone? The thought of someone else taking them sent a chill down my spine. As time passed, I began to feel a strange sense of dread. The house felt different, almost as if it were holding a secret. Every sound made me jump, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder. I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was an irrational thought, but it refused to leave my mind. Hours went by and I grew more desperate. I searched the same places again, hoping that I had somehow missed them the first time. The dish by the door remained empty, the countertops were bare, and my pockets held nothing but lint. I started questioning my own memory, wondering if I had even brought the keys home at all. Exhausted and frustrated, I finally gave up. I sat on the edge of my bed, rubbing my temples as I tried to make sense of everything. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more ridiculous than the last. Maybe they had fallen into some hidden crack in the house. Maybe I had thrown them away without realizing it. None of it made sense. Just as I was about to lie down, my eyes landed on my pillow. My breath caught in my throat. There, resting perfectly in the center, were my missing keys. I stared in disbelief, my heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. They had not been there moments ago. I was certain of it. I reached out slowly, my fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold metal. The weight of the keys was familiar, but something about them felt different. It was as if they carried an unseen presence, a lingering trace of whatever force had moved them. My mind raced for an explanation, but none came. A wave of unease washed over me as I sat frozen in place. The house was silent, yet I could not shake the feeling that I was not alone. I glanced around the room, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows, but there was nothing, just the steady hum of the night pressing in around me. I wanted to believe that I had simply overlooked them, that my exhaustion had made me careless, but deep down I knew better. There was no logical reason for them to be on my pillow. I had searched the entire house, and they had not been there before. Someone or something had placed them there. Despite my fear, I forced myself to stay calm. I picked up the keys and held them tightly in my hand, as if that would somehow make the situation less strange. I told myself that it was over, that I could put this behind me. But the truth was, I would never forget what had happened. That night, I locked my doors and double-checked every window. I left a light on in the hallway, unwilling to let the darkness settle completely. Sleep did not come easily. Every creak of the house made me tense, and every shadow seemed to move just out of sight. I kept the keys beside me, unwilling to let them out of my reach. The next morning, I woke with a heavy feeling in my chest. The keys were still where I had left them, as if mocking my confusion. I picked them up again. turning them over in my hand. They looked the same as always, but I could not shake the sense that something had changed. I never found an explanation for what happened that day. There was no logical reason for the keys to disappear and reappear in such a strange way. I tried to convince myself that it had all been a trick of the mind, but deep down I knew better. Something had moved them. Something had placed them on my pillow. From that day forward, I never left my keys out in the open. I kept them close, always within reach, as if afraid they would vanish again. But no matter how much time passed, I could never forget the eerie feeling that came with their return. The house had given them back, but at what cost? Story 4. I was walking home from work when I heard it. A voice, quiet but deliberate, whispered my full name as I passed by a stranger. My steps faltered, and my heart pounded as I turned my head. The person who had spoken had already disappeared into the crowd. I did not recognize them, and yet they had known my name. The street was busy with people moving in all directions, their conversations blending into a murmur. I scanned the faces around me, searching for anyone who looked familiar. No one paid me any attention, and I wondered if I had imagined it. The whisper had been too clear, too precise to be a trick of my mind. A chill crept up my spine as I continued walking. For the rest of the evening, I could not shake the unease that settled over me. I tried to focus on my usual routine, but my thoughts kept returning to that single moment. How had a complete stranger known my name? I lived a quiet life and rarely spoke to people outside of work. There was no reason for anyone to recognize me in a crowded street. Sleep did not come easily that night. Each time I closed my eyes, I replayed the memory in my mind. The whisper had been close, as if the person had leaned in to make sure I heard it. I tried to recall their face, but all I could remember was the sensation of being watched. My name had been spoken with a certainty that made me feel exposed. The next morning, I left for work with a strange sense of paranoia. I glanced over my shoulder more than once, feeling as though someone was watching me. The logical part of my mind told me I was overreacting. It had been a single moment, nothing more. But deep inside, I could not ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Days passed, and I did my best to forget about the encounter. Nothing unusual happened, and I convinced myself it had been a coincidence. But just as I began to feel at ease, it happened again. This time I was leaving a small cafe, my hands full with a warm drink. As I stepped outside, a voice brushed past my ear. It was the same voice whispering my name once more. I turned sharply, my heart hammering against my ribs. The street was filled with people, but no one seemed to be looking at me. My breath came in quick gasps as I scanned the faces, searching for something familiar. It was just like before someone had whispered my name and vanished without a trace. My hands trembled as I held my drink, the warmth doing nothing to ease the chill inside me. I walked home in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities. Someone was following me, but why? I was not important, not someone who should be remembered. My life was simple and uneventful. There was no reason for anyone to take an interest in me. And yet twice now, someone had whispered my name in passing. I debated whether to tell someone about it, but what could I say? That a stranger had spoken my name and then disappeared. It sounded ridiculous. I had no proof, nothing to go on except my own unease. If I told anyone, they would think I would think paranoid. Even I was beginning to wonder if I was losing my grip on reality. The following week, I kept my head down and tried to live as normally as possible. But I was always aware of my surroundings, always listening for that voice. I told myself it would not happen again, but deep down I knew better. And sure enough, the third time came when I least expected it. I was in a bookstore, browsing through the shelves when I heard it. The whisper was so close that I felt the breath against my ear. My full name spoken in that same familiar yet unknown voice. A shiver ran down my spine, and I turned around sharply. But just like before, there was no one there. The other shoppers were focused on their own business, unaware of the panic building inside me. This time I refused to let it go. I left the bookstore immediately, my pulse racing as I stepped onto the street. I needed answers. Someone was following me, watching me, and I had to find out who. I scanned the faces around me, searching for anyone who seemed out of place. But there was nothing. No shadowy figure, no lingering gaze, no sign of the whisperer. That night, I sat in my apartment with the lights on, my thoughts restless. If this was just a coincidence, it was an impossible one. Someone knew my name. Someone wanted me to know they were there. But why were they playing this game instead of revealing themselves? The uncertainty was worse than anything else. I had no idea what to expect next. Days passed in a blur of anxiety and exhaustion. I barely slept, afraid that I would wake to the sound of my name being spoken in the dark. I checked my phone constantly, half expecting a message from an unknown number, but nothing came. It was as if the whisperer was waiting for me to act first. Then, one evening, something changed. I was walking home when I felt an undeniable presence behind me. I did not hear a voice this time, but I knew someone was there. My pulse quickened as I quickened my pace, my hands clenched into fists. I turned a corner sharply and ducked into a store, pressing myself against the shelves. I waited, breathless, watching the entrance, and then after a long moment I saw them. A figure stood just outside, scanning the street as if searching for something, or someone. They did not enter, did not speak. After a few moments they turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I stayed in the store for a long time, my body tense. That had been them, the whisperer. They had followed me, just as I had feared. But now I knew they were real. They were not a figment of my imagination. Someone had been watching me all along. I decided then that I could not keep living in fear. The next day, I changed my routine, taking different routes and avoiding familiar places. I stayed in crowded areas and never walked home alone. I was cautious, but I refused to let my life be ruled by an unseen stranger. And slowly, the whisper stopped. Weeks went by, then months. The paranoia faded, replaced by a cautious sense of relief. Whoever they were, they had given up, or perhaps they had never intended harm in the first place. I would never know. But as time passed, I let myself believe that it was over. And yet, even now when I walk alone at night, I sometimes feel it. The faintest hint of a whisper, just beyond my hearing. A reminder that once someone had spoken my name in passing, and that for a time I had not been alone. Story 5. I stared at the note in my hands, the familiar strokes of my own handwriting staring back at me. The ink had dried long ago, but the words felt fresh, unsettling. I read them again, hoping for some spark of recognition, but nothing came. The paper was slightly crumpled, as if it had been hastily torn from a notebook and stuffed away. My fingers tightened around it as I struggled to remember when and why I had written it. The message was brief but strange, a warning or a reminder, though I was not sure which. The words did not sound like something I would write, yet the handwriting was undeniably mine. My mind felt clouded, like a puzzle with missing pieces. I sat down at the edge of my bed, the note trembling slightly in my grip. My heart pounded as I tried to retrace my steps to recall anything that might explain this mystery. I checked my phone, scrolling through my messages and notes, hoping for some clue. Nothing stood out, no saved drafts or forgotten memos. My calendar had no strange appointments, no meetings I could not recall. I searched my desk, my drawers, even the trash, but there were no other notes like this. It was as if this message had appeared from nowhere, left by a version of me I did not remember. A chill ran down my spine as I considered the possibilities. Had I written this in my sleep, lost in a dream I could not recall? And had I been under stress, so much so that I had forgotten my own actions? Or was there another explanation, one that I was not ready to face? The thought made my stomach turn, but I needed answers. I could not ignore the strange feeling that something was off. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. I studied the note again, searching for anything that might help me understand. The words were written in a rush, the letters slightly slanted, as if I had been in a hurry. The ink was smudged in places, as if my hand had shaken while writing it. Something about it felt desperate, urgent, but I could not grasp why. I stood up and began searching the room again, more carefully this time. If I had written this note, there had to be something else, some sign of what had happened. I checked my nightstand, my bookshelf, even under my bed, but nothing seemed out of place. My heart pounded as I moved to my closet, my hands unsteady as I pulled the door open. Inside, everything was where it should be, clothes hanging neatly, shoes lined up on the floor. But something felt wrong, a sense of unease creeping over me. I reached for the small lockbox I kept on the top shelf, my fingers trembling as I pulled it down. I had not opened it in a long time, but something told me I needed to now. The key was in my nightstand drawer, right where I had left it. My breath caught as I unlocked the box, lifting the lid with cautious hands. Inside were old letters, some photographs, and a few small trinkets from my past. My eyes scanned the contents, searching for anything that might connect to the note. That was when I saw it. A second note, written in the same hurried handwriting, tucked between two old photographs. My pulse raced as I unfolded it, my breath catching as I read the words. It was a warning, telling me not to trust someone, though the name had been smudged beyond recognition. My mind reeled as I tried to understand why I would have written such a thing. I sank onto the bed, both notes in my hands, my thoughts spinning. Had I been afraid of someone? Had I discovered something terrible and tried to remind myself later? The memory was gone, erased as if it had never existed. Yet the fear lingered, pressing down on me like a weight I could not lift. I needed to know the truth. I grabbed my phone and checked my recent calls, my messages, anything that might give me a lead. There was nothing unusual, no missed calls, no strange texts. But then, just as I was about to give up, I noticed something strange. A call made in the middle of the night, one I did not remember making. My stomach twisted as I listened to the voicemail, my own voice barely a whisper. The message was brief, the words chilling. I had called myself, left a message telling myself to be careful, to stay away from someone. My own voice sounded panicked, almost pleading, but I had no memory of making that call. I replayed the message over and over, trying to find some hint of what had happened. The sound of my own fear made my skin crawl, but I needed to understand. I needed to know who I was warning myself about. My hands trembled as I stared at my reflection in the mirror, my own face unfamiliar in that moment. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing through every possibility. Had I been in danger? Had I seen something I was not supposed to see? The questions had no answers, only an overwhelming sense of unease. But one thing was clear. Whoever I had warned myself about, I needed to find out who they were before it was too late. Story 6. I woke up to the sight of muddy footprints stretching across my bedroom floor. They led from the front door to the foot of my bed, a chilling sight that sent a shiver down my spine. The prints were fresh, the damp soil clinging to the wooden boards, staining them in uneven patches. My heart pounded as I sat up, my eyes following the trail that disappeared beneath my bed. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to take slow, steady breaths as I tried to make sense of the situation. The night before had been unremarkable, or so I had thought. I had locked the door before heading to bed, ensuring the windows were shut tight. There had been no signs of a storm, no reason for someone to track in so much mud. The silence of my house now felt suffocating, the stillness pressing in on me from all sides. I glanced toward the door, my mind racing through the possibilities of how and why this had happened. Slowly, I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet barely making a sound on the wooden floor. I hesitated, wondering if I should check under the bed or follow the footprints back to the front door. My instincts screamed at me to be cautious, but curiosity got the better of me. I crouched down, my breath catching in my throat as I peered into the dark space beneath my bed. There was nothing there, just dust and shadows, but the unease in my chest remained. With careful steps, I followed the trail, each muddy print a stark contrast against the floor. The air in the house felt heavy, as if something unseen lingered just out of reach. The front door was closed, locked just as I had left it. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the handle, unlocking it and pulling it open. The sight outside did little to ease my concerns. The ground was dry, the earth undisturbed except for a few stray leaves. I stepped out onto the porch, scanning the area for any sign of an intruder. There were no footprints leading up to my door, no signs that anyone had entered from outside. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what that meant. Whoever had left those footprints had not come from outside. They had been inside already, moving through my home while I slept, their presence unnoticed until morning. A creeping dread settled in as I stepped back inside, locking the door behind me. My mind raced through the events of the previous day, searching for any detail I might have missed. Had I forgotten to check the back door? Had I left a window open? Nothing seemed out of place, and yet the evidence before me told a different story. I needed to check every room, every corner, to be certain I was alone. I moved cautiously through the house, my senses on high alert. Each creak of the floor beneath my feet made me pause, my pulse quickening with every step. The kitchen was empty, the chairs neatly tucked under the table. The living room remained undisturbed, the couch pillows still in place. The bathroom door stood ajar, revealing nothing but my own reflection in the mirror. Every part of the house seemed normal, yet the feeling of being watched never left me. The last place to check was the basement. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, staring down into the darkness below. I rarely went down there, only using it for storage, but if someone had been in my house, I needed to be sure they were truly gone. I took a deep breath, gripping the railing as I descended one step at a time. The air grew colder as I went lower, the musty scent of old wood and dust filling my nose. The basement was silent, the dim light from a single bulb casting long shadows across the walls. Boxes were stacked neatly along the far side, untouched since the last time I had been down here. My eyes scanned the space, searching for any movement, any sign that someone had been hiding there. The only thing that stood out was the faint impression of a footprint near the bottom step, the dried mud barely visible against the concrete floor. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. Someone had been down here, but they were gone now. The thought sent a new wave of fear through me. How had they left? Where had they gone? If they were no longer in the house, had they simply vanished into thin air? I hurried back upstairs, locking the basement door behind me as if that could somehow erase the presence of the intruder. The rest of the day passed in a haze of unease. I cleaned up the footprints, scrubbing the floor until no trace remained. I checked every lock twice, making sure all the windows were secured. But no matter how much I tried to push it from my mind, the feeling of being watched never faded. I tried to convince myself it had been a dream, a strange trick of my imagination, but the memory of those muddy footprints refused to disappear. That night I barely slept, my ears straining to catch any sound of movement. The house remained silent, yet the sense of unease lingered in the air. Every shadow seemed darker, every noise more ominous. I told myself it was over, that whoever had been there was gone, but deep down, I knew the truth. They had been inside once, and if they had come before, they could come again. Days passed, and the fear never truly left me. I avoided staying out too late, always making sure to lock every door the moment I stepped inside. I set up cameras, hoping to catch any sign of intruders, but nothing ever showed up. It was as if the footprints had been a warning, a reminder that I was never truly alone. One evening, as I prepared for bed, a noise from downstairs made me freeze. It was faint, barely audible, but enough to send my heart racing. I moved cautiously toward the staircase, listening intently. The sound came again, a soft creak, like a footstep on wood. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what it meant. Someone was in the house. I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling as I dialed for help. My voice was barely steady as I explained the situation, the dispatcher assuring me that someone would arrive soon. I backed away from the stairs, retreating to my bedroom and locking the door behind me. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone, my mind racing through every worst-case scenario. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, every sound amplifying my fear. When the authorities arrived, I barely heard their knock over the pounding of my own heartbeat. They searched the house thoroughly, checking every room, every corner. Yet once again, there was no sign of an intruder. No footprints, no forced entry, nothing out of place. One of the officers assured me that they would patrol the area, but the look in their eyes told me they thought I had imagined it. I wanted to believe that too, but I knew what I had heard. I knew what I had seen. As they left, I stood at the front door, staring out into the night, wondering if the unseen presence was still there, watching, waiting. I never saw the footprints again, but the feeling of being watched never left me. The silence of the house no longer felt comforting but suffocating, a reminder that someone or something had been there. I changed the locks, installed more security, but deep down I knew it would never be enough. Whatever had entered my home that night had left no trace but a lingering fear, and no matter how much time passed, I would never forget the muddy footprints that led to my bed. Story 7. The hotel room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. The long day of travel had left me exhausted, and I was ready to settle in for the night. The bed was comfortable, the pillows soft, and the heavy curtains blocked out the city lights. I had checked in without any issues, and the staff had been polite and professional. Everything seemed normal, exactly as a hotel stay should be. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, the room phone rang. The sharp sound startled me, breaking the silence of the room. My heart pounded as I reached for the receiver, expecting to hear the voice of the front desk clerk. Instead, there was nothing but silence on the other end. I frowned, saying hello a few times, but no one responded. I hung up, brushing off the call as a mistake. Perhaps someone had dialed the wrong room number or guest had been trying to reach a friend. It was not unusual for mistakes like that to happen in hotels. I turned over, adjusting the blankets, determined to go back to sleep. Within minutes, the phone rang again. A cold feeling settled in my chest as I sat up and grabbed the receiver. Again, there was only silence. I waited for several seconds, listening carefully, but there was no breathing, no background noise, nothing at all. Slowly, I set the phone back down. The uneasy feeling from before had deepened, and now I was wide awake. Deciding to get some answers, I picked up my cell phone and called the front desk. A woman answered, her voice calm and professional. I explained that I had received 2 calls, but no one had spoken. There was a brief pause before she responded. Her words made my stomach twist. "No one has called your room," she said. I blinked, gripping the phone tighter. "Are you sure?" The phone rang twice, and no one was there. "I am certain," she replied. "Our system keeps a record of all calls made to guest rooms. No calls have been placed to your room tonight." A chill ran down my spine. There was no reason for the phone to ring unless someone had dialed the number. I forced a laugh, trying to push away the growing unease. Maybe there was a glitch with the system. "That is possible," she admitted. "I can have maintenance check it in the morning if you would like." I thanked her and hung up, but the uneasy feeling did not fade. A logical explanation existed, I told myself. The system could be malfunctioning, or maybe a guest from another room had accidentally dialed mine. Still, something about the calls did not feel right. I lay back down, my body tense, waiting to see if it would happen again. For a long time the room was silent. The air conditioning continued its steady hum. The occasional sound of distant traffic filtered through the thick walls. Eventually, exhaustion won over, and my eyelids grew heavy. Just as I started to drift off, the phone rang a 3rd time. I sat up so fast that my pulse roared in my ears. My hands trembled as I reached for the receiver. Slowly, I lifted it to my ear, my breath shallow. This time, there was something different. Faint breathing. My skin prickled, and a lump formed in my throat. "Hello," I whispered. The breathing continued, slow and deliberate, as if someone was just listening. My hands tightened around the receiver. "Who is this?" No response. A sharp click sounded, and the line went dead. I lowered the phone, my heart hammering in my chest. My mouth felt dry as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. Someone had been on the other end that time. Someone had been listening. I grabbed my cell phone and called the front desk again. The same woman answered, and I told her what had just happened. Her voice lost its professional calm, and I could tell she was unnerved. "I do not understand," she said. "No one should be able to call your room without going through the main system." I hesitated. "Are you saying the call did not come from inside the hotel?" "There is no record of any incoming calls to your room," she said again, her voice tight. "But I can send someone up if you are feeling unsafe." I agreed without hesitation. A few minutes later, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, a hotel security guard stood there, his expression serious. He stepped inside, scanning the room before turning to me. "I heard you received some strange calls," he said. I nodded, my stomach still twisted with unease. The first 2 were silent, but the 3rd one had someone breathing on the other end. The front desk said no calls were made to my room. The guard frowned and walked over to the phone. He picked up the receiver, listening for a moment before setting it down. "No static, no unusual sounds," he muttered. "It could be a system issue, but I will check the call logs myself." I followed him to the door, reluctant to be left alone. "Have you ever had reports of this happening before?" He hesitated before answering. "Not recently." The way he said it sent a shiver through me. I wanted to ask more, but he excused himself, promising to investigate. After he left, I double-checked the locks and sat on the bed, hugging my knees to my chest. I did not know if I would be able to sleep. Hours passed, and I remained awake, listening to every small sound. The phone did not ring again, but the silence felt heavy, as if something unseen lingered just beyond my reach. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, I packed my things quickly, eager to leave. When I stopped by the front desk to check out, the same woman from the night before was there. She looked tired, her face pale. As she handed me my receipt, she hesitated. The security guard reviewed the call logs, she said quietly. He found something strange. I swallowed hard. What? Her fingers tapped against the counter. Your room did receive calls, but they were not made through our system. The lines show the calls came from within the hotel, specifically from another guest room. My blood ran cold. Which room? She lowered her voice. A room on the same floor as yours, but that room has been vacant for weeks. A sharp chill ran down my spine. I felt the weight of her words settle in my chest like a heavy stone. There was no logical explanation for what had happened. I gripped my suitcase handle tightly. Did security check the room? They did, she said. It was empty. No signs of forced entry. No signs that anyone had been there at all. I did not know what to say. My mind raced, trying to piece together an answer that made sense. But no matter how I looked at it, nothing did. The woman gave me a small, apologetic smile. I understand if you do not want to stay with us again. I nodded, knowing I would never return. As I stepped out of the hotel and into the bright morning light, I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the lingering fear. I told myself it was over, that it was just some strange, unexplainable event. But deep down, I knew I would always wonder who or what had been on the other end of that phone. Story 8. The evening air was cool as I stepped into my apartment, shutting the door behind me with a sigh. It had been a long day, and all I wanted was to unwind in the comfort of my own space. Tossing my keys onto the counter, I reached for my phone, which had been buzzing in my pocket. Several new messages sat unread, all from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening them, a strange sense of unease creeping into my chest. The first message contained nothing but an image, and as I tapped on it, my breath caught in my throat. It was a picture of my apartment, taken from an angle I had never seen before. The perspective was high, almost as if someone had been watching from a hidden vantage point. My living room was captured in perfect clarity, the soft glow of the lamps illuminating the space. I glanced around, my heart pounding, searching for any sign of an intruder. Swallowing hard, I opened the next message, and another image filled my screen. This time, the photo was taken from outside my bedroom window, the curtains slightly parted. I felt my stomach tighten as my pulse quickened, my fingers gripping the phone tighter. Someone had been watching me, documenting my home without my knowledge. I stepped toward the window cautiously, pulling the curtains closed in one swift motion. I checked the locks on the door, ensuring they were secure before returning to my phone. Another message had arrived, a single word typed beneath the last image. Do you see me? A chill ran down my spine as I reread the text, my mind racing with questions. I had no idea who this person was or how long they had been observing me. Taking a deep breath, I decided to respond. Who is this? My fingers trembled as I hit send, my eyes flickering toward the window again. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before another message arrived. A new photo appeared, this one taken from the hallway just outside my apartment door. My breath hitched as I realized it was recent. The lights in the hallway were the same as when I had walked in only minutes ago. Panic settled in as I rushed to the peephole, my heart hammering in my chest. The hallway outside was empty, no sign of anyone lingering near my door. I pressed my back against the wall, gripping my phone tightly as my thoughts raced. If the person had been there only moments ago, where had they gone? My stomach churned with the realization that someone had been dangerously close, watching me up until the moment I had stepped inside. I needed to call someone, but I hesitated, unsure of what to say. There was no proof of who this person was, only the eerie images that sent my mind into a spiral. Another message arrived, this one even more unsettling. Do not look outside. My breath caught as my grip on the phone tightened. My instincts screamed at me to check, to see if someone was standing out there right now, but fear rooted me in place. The silence in my apartment felt deafening, every small noise amplified in the tension. I forced myself to move, inching toward the front door again. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, my heart pounding so loudly it echoed in my ears. Just as I was about to turn it, another message appeared. If you open the door, I will know. A sharp exhale left my lips as I pulled my hand away. This was not some prank. Whoever this was knew exactly what I was doing in real time. I felt trapped, suffocated by the walls that were meant to protect me. I quickly backed away from the door, scanning my apartment for anything unusual. If they could see me, then there had to be a way they were watching. I checked every corner of the room, every possible hiding place. The unsettling truth dawned on me. I had no idea where the person was watching from. Another photo arrived, this time a close-up of the window I had just closed. My own reflection was faintly visible in the glass, as if the picture had been taken just seconds ago. Fear clawed at my chest as I grabbed my phone and dialed security. My voice was shaky as I explained the situation, describing the images and the messages. The person on the other end remained calm, assuring me they would send someone to check the building. Relief mingled with my fear as I realized help was on the way. Minutes passed like hours as I waited, every creak and shift of the apartment making me jump. I tried not to look at my phone, afraid of seeing another message. When a knock finally came at the door, I hesitated before answering, checking through the peephole first. The sight of the security guard brought a wave of relief, and I quickly unbolted the door. The guard stepped inside, scanning the room as I handed him my phone. He frowned as he scrolled through the photos, his expression growing more serious with each one. He checked the hallway and my windows, but like me, he found nothing. After a few more minutes of searching, he sighed and turned to me. There were no cameras or signs of forced entry. Whoever had sent those messages had vanished without a trace. He assured me they would review security footage and increase patrols in the area. Though his presence was reassuring, it did little to ease the knot of fear in my stomach. Someone had been watching me, and even if they were gone for now, they could return. The security guard advised me to stay vigilant, lock my doors, and report any more strange messages. I nodded, though my hand still shook as I set my phone down. That night, sleep did not come easily. Every shadow seemed darker, every noise louder. I kept the lights on, the phone beside me on the nightstand. Hours passed and no more messages arrived. Yet, I could not shake the feeling of unseen eyes lingering in the darkness. Days went by, and no more messages came. The security team never found out who had been sending them, or how the photos had been taken. The unease never fully left me, but I took extra precautions, making sure my apartment was secure at all times. Though I never discovered the truth, one thing remained certain. Someone had been watching me, and they had been close. Closer than I ever wanted to imagine. Story 9. The package arrived earlier than expected. I had ordered it just 2 days ago, expecting the usual delay, but the tracking number showed it was already out for delivery. I was glad since I had been looking forward to it. The notification on my phone buzzed. letting me know it had been dropped off at my doorstep. I got up from my couch and walked to the front door, eager to bring it inside. As I opened the door, the cool afternoon air rushed in, and I spotted the package sitting neatly on the doormat. The delivery driver was still there, standing just a few feet away. He was looking at me, his expression unreadable. I gave a polite nod and bent down to pick up the package, expecting him to leave. Instead, he stayed where he was, hands tucked into his pockets. Something about the way he stood made me uncomfortable. I straightened up, holding the box against my side. "Thanks," I said, hoping that would be enough to make him go. He did not move. He just kept looking at me, as if he was waiting for something. The silence stretched between us, growing heavier with each passing second. My fingers tightened around the edges of the package. "Is there something else?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. The delivery man tilted his head slightly, as if considering my question. Then he smiled, but there was something off about it. It was not friendly or polite. It felt practiced, like he was trying to imitate an expression he did not actually feel. "No problem," he finally said. "Just making sure everything is in order." His voice was even, almost too smooth. There was no reason for him to still be standing there. He had done his job. I had my package. That should have been the end of it. I forced a small smile and took a step back. "I appreciate it," I said. "Have a good day." Then I closed the door before he could respond. I locked it immediately, pressing my back against the wood as I let out a slow breath. Through the peephole, I expected to see him walking away, heading back to his truck. But he was still there, standing in the exact same spot. I felt my stomach twist as a wave of unease washed over me. He should have left by now. I turned away from the door, trying to shake the feeling. Maybe he was just checking something on his phone. Maybe he was finishing up his route before getting back in his truck. I told myself there was a logical explanation. But then minutes passed. 5, then 10. I checked the peephole again. He was still there, still watching my door. A chill crept up my spine. I reached for my phone, debating whether to call someone. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud in the silence of my home. The logical side of my brain told me that I was overreacting. He had no reason to do anything. He was just standing there. But that was the problem. He was just standing there. I decided to wait a little longer, hoping he would leave on his own. I distracted myself by opening the package, trying to focus on the reason I had ordered it in the first place. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the presence outside my door lingered in the back of my mind. I checked the peephole again. He had moved closer. Panic surged through me, my grip tightening on my phone. He was not knocking. He was not saying anything. He was just there, too close, as if he was listening for something on the other side. I took a step back, my breathing shallow. I needed to do something. Call someone. Get help. This was not normal. I dialed the non-emergency police number, forcing my voice to stay steady as I explained the situation. The operator listened patiently before asking if I was in immediate danger. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. He had not done anything, not really. But my gut told me something was wrong. She assured me an officer would be sent to check things out. I stayed near the door, my ears straining to hear any movement outside. The minutes dragged on, each second stretching unbearably long. Then finally the sound of a car approaching, a police vehicle. I checked the peephole one last time. The delivery man was gone. The relief that flooded through me was immediate but short-lived. I cracked the door open just as the officer stepped up onto my porch. He asked me a few questions, taking down a description of the man and the truck he had driven. He looked around the neighborhood, scanning for any sign of him. But there was nothing. No trace that he had ever been there at all. After assuring me they would patrol the area, the officer left, and I locked the door behind him. My home felt different now, as if the air had shifted. I tried to go about my evening as usual, but the tension never fully left my body. Hours later, when the sun had set and my house was dark, except for the dim glow of the hallway light, I checked the peephole one last time, just to be sure. For a second, I thought I saw movement at the edge of the street. A shadow, too far to make out clearly. My breath caught in my throat, but when I blinked, it was gone. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was letting paranoia get the best of me. But deep down, I was not so sure. Story 10. It started as an ordinary day, nothing out of the ordinary to suggest that something strange was about to happen. I woke up to the sound of my alarm and reached for my phone, but my hand landed on an empty space. Confused, I pushed back the blankets and checked the nightstand, but it was not there. I frowned, sitting up and scanning the room, expecting to see it somewhere nearby. The more I looked, the more uneasy I became because my phone was nowhere to be found. I retraced my steps from the night before, trying to remember where I had last seen it. I checked the living room, the kitchen, and even the bathroom, but there was no sign of it. Frustration built up inside me as I searched under cushions and inside drawers, but it was useless. I was certain I had left it on my nightstand before going to bed, yet somehow it had disappeared without a trace. After nearly an hour of searching, I gave up and used my computer to track its location. The screen loaded slowly, and I held my breath, waiting for the results. When the map finally appeared, my heart stopped for a moment. My phone was not in my house. It was somewhere miles away, in a part of town I had never visited before. A cold chill ran down my spine as I stared at the screen. There was no way I had left my phone there. I had not gone anywhere near that place. My hands trembled slightly as I tried to think of a rational explanation. Maybe someone had stolen it, but how? My front door had been locked all night, and there was no sign of a break-in. It made no sense. Deciding there was only one way to find out, I grabbed my keys and headed out. The drive to the location was filled with uneasy thoughts. The closer I got, the more anxious I felt. The tracker led me to an old building on the outskirts of town, a place I had no reason to visit. The windows were boarded up, and the walls were covered in faded graffiti. It looked abandoned. I parked the car and hesitated before stepping out. The silence around me felt unnatural, as if the place had been forgotten by time. I checked my phone tracker again, and the signal had not moved. My phone was still here. Taking a deep breath, I approached the entrance and pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, the sound echoing through the empty space. Inside, the air was stale, filled with dust and decay. Broken furniture and scattered papers littered the floor. I swallowed hard, feeling a deep sense of wrongness settle in my chest. I followed the signal down a hallway, each step making my heart pound louder. The location pinpointed a room at the end of the corridor. The door was slightly open, and I hesitated before pushing it wider. My breath caught in my throat as I saw what was inside. There, sitting on an old wooden table, was my phone. It looked exactly as I remembered it, undisturbed, as if someone had placed it there intentionally. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, half expecting something to happen. As soon as I touched it, the screen lit up with several missed calls and messages. A deep sense of unease crept over me. Who had brought my phone here? And why had they left it in an abandoned building? I turned around quickly, scanning the room for any signs of life. The space was empty, but I could not shake the feeling that someone had been here recently. I checked the last message on my phone, and my stomach twisted. It was a single text that I did not recognize. The message was short, just 3 words. "Did you see?" My hands grew clammy as I tried to process what it meant. See what? There was nothing here except dust and broken furniture. A sudden noise made me freeze in place. It was faint, like the sound of footsteps somewhere nearby. My heart pounded as I listened, every muscle in my body tense. The footsteps grew louder, slow and deliberate. Someone was here. I turned off my phone screen and held my breath, backing toward the door. The footsteps stopped just outside the room. For a moment there was only silence. Then, the door slammed shut with a force that made the walls shake. Panic surged through me as I grabbed the handle, but it would not budge. I pounded on the door, my breathing fast and uneven. I was trapped. My mind raced as I tried to think of a way out. My phone had a signal, which meant I could call for help. With shaking hands, I dialed emergency services, pressing the phone to my ear. The ringing felt endless before a voice finally answered. I explained my situation quickly, my voice barely steady. The operator assured me that help was on the way and instructed me to stay put. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as I stood in that dark room, listening for any sign of movement outside. My body was tense, every sound making me flinch. Then, just as suddenly as it had slammed shut, the door creaked open again. I held my breath, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was no one. The hallway was empty, just as it had been before. The air felt heavier now, filled with an unseen presence that sent chills down my spine. I did not wait to question it. Clutching my phone, I ran out of the building as fast as my legs would carry me. The moment I stepped outside, I felt like I could breathe again. Minutes later, a police car pulled up, its flashing lights cutting through the darkness. An officer stepped out and approached me, asking what had happened. I explained everything: the missing phone, the strange location, the door trapping me inside. He listened carefully, his expression serious. After checking the building, the officer returned with a deep frown. "There is no one inside," he said, shaking his head. "No footprints, no sign that anyone else was here." My blood ran cold at his words. If no one had been there, then who had slammed the door? I tried to make sense of it, but nothing fit. My phone had vanished from my home and reappeared in a place I had never been. Someone had wanted me to find it, and the message, "Did you see?" still lingered in my mind like an unanswered question. The officer advised me to stay somewhere else for the night, just in case. I nodded, knowing that sleep would not come easily after what had happened. As I drove away, I glanced at my phone one last time. The tracker was still active, showing my location as I moved. Then, without warning, the dot on the screen shifted. For a brief moment, it showed another location miles away, another place I had never been. And then, just as quickly as it had changed, the signal disappeared completely. My phone went dark, the battery suddenly dead. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my heart racing. Whoever had taken my phone was not done yet, and somehow I knew this was only the beginning. Story 11. The night air was crisp as I stepped out of the office, stretching my arms after a long day. The building was nearly empty, the hum of computers and distant footsteps the only sounds breaking the silence. I had stayed later than usual, buried under paperwork that never seemed to end. As I walked toward the parking lot, I pulled my coat tighter around me, eager to get home. The thought of a warm meal and some rest was the only thing keeping me going. The parking lot was nearly deserted, with only a few cars left scattered across the pavement. My footsteps echoed as I approached my car, the dim glow of the overhead lights casting long shadows. I reached into my pocket for my keys, already thinking about the drive home. But as I drew closer, something about my car seemed off. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach before I even realized what was wrong. I stopped in my tracks, staring at the tires. All 4 of them had been slashed, deep gashes running along the rubber. My breath caught in my throat as I took a step closer, my mind racing. The damage was severe, not something that could have happened by accident. Someone had done this on purpose, and they had meant for me to see it. A wave of unease washed over me as I glanced around the empty lot. The shadows seemed darker, the silence heavier. My heart pounded as I reached for my phone, my hand shaking slightly. I needed to call someone to figure out what to do next. As I dialed, I kept my eyes on my surroundings, suddenly aware of how alone I was. The call connected, and I explained what had happened, my voice steadier than I expected. Help was on the way, but the wait felt like an eternity. I paced beside my car, trying to keep my thoughts from spiraling. Who would do something like this? Why would they target me? No matter how much I thought about it, I could not come up with an answer. A noise in the distance made me freeze, my breath catching. It was faint, like the shuffle of footsteps against the pavement. I turned quickly, scanning the lot for any movement. My pulse raced as I strained to see beyond the dim glow of the streetlights. But there was nothing, only the wind carrying the sound away. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that my nerves were making me paranoid, but deep down I knew better. Someone had been here. Someone had done this while I was inside, completely unaware. The thought made my skin crawl, sending a shiver down my spine. Minutes stretched on, each one heavier than the last. I stayed close to my car, gripping my phone tightly. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to shift. The once familiar parking lot now felt unfamiliar, almost threatening. I had never felt unsafe here before, but that night everything had changed. Finally, the sound of an approaching vehicle broke the silence. Relief flooded through me as I spotted the headlights, a welcome sight in the darkness. Help had arrived, and with it, a sense of security I had not realized I needed. I stepped forward, forcing myself to take a steady breath. No matter how shaken I felt, I had to keep moving. After explaining what had happened, I watched as the damage was assessed. The slashes were deep, precise. This had not been a random act of vandalism. Someone had done this with purpose, knowing exactly what they were doing. The realization sent another chill through me, making my hands clench at my sides. I answered questions as best as I could, though my mind was still spinning. I had no known enemies, no recent conflicts that could explain this. Nothing made sense. The idea that someone had gone out of their way to do this specifically to me was unsettling. I wanted answers, but none seemed to come. Arrangements were made for my car, and I was given a ride home. As I sat in the passenger seat, I stared out the window, my thoughts a tangled mess. The night seemed darker than usual, the city quieter. Every passing car, every shadowed alley made my heart race. I told myself that I was safe now, but it did not feel that way. When I finally stepped through my front door, exhaustion hit me all at once. I locked the door behind me, checking it twice before setting my keys down. The house was silent, but instead of comfort, it only made the unease settle deeper. I moved through each room, checking the windows, making sure everything was as it should be. Sleep did not come easily that night. Every creak of the house, every distant sound outside made me tense. My mind replayed the moment I saw my tires, the sharp cuts in the rubber burned into my memory. Someone had been there, in that lot, waiting for the right moment. The thought made my stomach twist. The next morning I felt no better. The fear lingered, a quiet weight pressing on my chest. As I made my way to work, I kept glancing over my shoulder, checking the mirrors more than usual. I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched. Paranoia or not, I was not willing to take any chances. When I arrived, the parking lot felt different. The usual routine of pulling in, finding a spot, and heading inside now felt like a risk. I parked closer to the building, near the entrance where more people were around. Even then, my hands felt unsteady as I turned off the engine. I took a deep breath, trying to push away the lingering fear. The day passed slowly, each hour stretching longer than the last. I forced myself to focus, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the night before. Who had done it? Why? The lack of answers only made it worse. I hated not knowing, hated the feeling of vulnerability that clung to me. As the sun began to set, I hesitated before leaving. The thought of walking back to my car in the dark sent a fresh wave of unease through me. I decided to leave while there were still people around, hoping it would make a difference. The moment I stepped outside, my eyes swept over the parking lot, searching for anything out of place. Relief flooded through me when I saw my car untouched. The tires were fine, no new damage, no sign that anyone had been near it. But the relief was short-lived. As I unlocked the door, I could not shake the feeling that this was not over. Whoever had done it was still out there, and they had already proven they were willing to wait. That night, I made a decision. I would not let fear control me, but I would not ignore it either. I took extra precautions, changed my routine, and stayed more aware of my surroundings. Whatever message had been sent by those slashed tires, I would not ignore it. I did not know who had done it or why, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not be caught off guard again. Story 12. It started with an innocent conversation at the dinner table. My child sat across from me, swinging their feet as they ate, eyes bright with excitement. They spoke of a new imaginary friend, someone they had met just a few days ago. I listened with a smile, thinking it was a phase like any other. Children often created imaginary companions, and I saw no reason for concern. At first, the stories were harmless. My child described games they played together and the adventures they imagined. They spoke as if this friend were real, but I brushed it off as part of a growing imagination. It was sweet in a way, a sign of creativity. I nodded along as they talked, asking simple questions to encourage the conversation. Everything seemed normal, at least in the beginning. Then, the details became unsettling. My child started mentioning this imaginary friend supposedly said. At first it was small things, like what we had eaten for breakfast or the color of my shirt the day before. But then it became more specific. They spoke about events that had happened when my child was not in the room, things they should not have known. My stomach twisted, but I tried to stay calm. I asked how this imaginary friend knew so much, hoping for a simple answer. My child just shrugged, smiling as if it were obvious. They said their friend was always around, watching and listening. The words made my skin prickle, but I forced a laugh. It was just a game, I told myself. My child was making up stories without realizing how strange they sounded. One evening, as I tucked my child into bed, they asked a question that froze me in place. They wanted to know why I had been crying the night before. My breath caught in my throat. I had not cried in front of them, had not mentioned my emotions at all. Yet my child knew. When I asked how they had found out, they smiled and whispered a name. Their imaginary friend had told them. I felt my pulse quicken, but I kept my expression neutral. I did not want to frighten my child. Instead, I asked about this friend again, trying to understand. My child described them in vague terms, never giving a clear answer about their appearance. They were tall, quiet, and always nearby. They were kind but knew everything. The way my child spoke made it sound so natural, so ordinary. That night I barely slept. I replayed every conversation in my mind, searching for a logical explanation. My child had overheard something, that was all. Maybe they had seen my reflection in a window or noticed a small detail I had overlooked. It had to be a coincidence. I told myself there was no other explanation. The next day, I watched my child more closely. They continued talking to their imaginary friend, laughing and whispering secrets. Sometimes they paused as if listening to a response. It was unsettling, but I tried to rationalize it. Children had active imaginations. This was just a phase. It would pass, but the uneasy feeling never left me. Then, something happened that I could not ignore. One afternoon, my child came running to me, eyes wide with worry. They said their imaginary friend had warned them about something. A broken dish, a spilled drink, a near fall down the stairs. Each time the warning came just before the event happened. It was as if this unseen friend knew what was coming. My chest tightened as I struggled to respond. I asked my child if they had made it up, but they shook their head firmly. No, their friend had told them. Their friend always knew things before they happened. My hands felt clammy as I tried to stay calm. It was impossible, yet I could not shake the growing sense of fear. What kind of imaginary friend was this? That night, I decided to test it. I asked my child to ask their friend a question, something simple but personal. My child giggled and whispered, waiting for an answer. A moment later, they turned to me with a wide smile. Their friend had a message for me. They repeated a phrase only one person had ever told me before. A phrase spoken to me long ago by someone who is no longer here. My stomach dropped. I forced myself to stay composed, though my heart pounded in my chest. I asked my child where this friend had come from. They only shrugged. They had been here all along, just waiting to be noticed. My child spoke as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I swallowed hard, unable to find the right words. Over the next few days, I tried to push the thought away. I told myself my child was guessing, that they were saying things by chance, but deep down I knew better. The details were too precise, too accurate to be coincidence. I started feeling watched in my own home, an unsettling presence lingering in the air. It was a weight I could not shake. Then, one evening, my child spoke in a way that sent chills down my spine. They repeated words they had no way of knowing. Words whispered in the dark, secrets buried in my past. I gripped the edge of the table, my mind racing. My child was too young to understand what they were saying, yet they spoke with certainty. They were simply repeating what their friend had told them. I knew then that I could not ignore this any longer. I sat my child down and told them that it was time to say goodbye to their imaginary friend. They frowned, confused and upset, but I remained firm. I told them that sometimes imaginary friends overstayed their welcome. Sometimes they needed to leave. My child hesitated before nodding, though they seemed unsure. That night I felt something shift in the air. The house was quieter than usual, the atmosphere lighter. My child no longer whispered in the corners, no longer paused to listen for unseen voices. It was as if something had finally let go. Relief flooded through me, though a small part of me remained cautious. I did not know what had been here, but I was glad it was gone. As time passed, my child stopped mentioning their friend. The imaginary companion faded like a forgotten dream, disappearing without a trace. Life returned to normal, the eerie feeling fading into memory. I told myself it had been nothing more than a child's game, an overactive imagination, but deep down I knew better. Even now, years later, I sometimes wonder about that time. I wonder who or what had been listening. I wonder how they had known so much. And sometimes when the house is too quiet, I catch myself holding my breath, listening, waiting, but nothing ever whispers back. Story 13. I was going through my emails when I noticed something strange. There were no alerts, no messages about suspicious activity, but something felt off. My inbox looked the same, my sent folder had no unfamiliar emails, and nothing seemed out of place. Yet I could not shake the feeling that something had changed. I decided to check my account settings just to be sure. As I navigated through the security settings, my heart began to race. My password was the same and my recovery options were untouched. Then I saw the home address linked to my account had been changed. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. It was not an address I recognized, and I had no memory of making this change. A chill ran through me as I tried to make sense of it. If someone had hacked my email, why would they only change my address? My financial accounts were linked to this email, yet there were no unauthorized transactions. My personal information was all there, but nothing else had been altered. The thought made my stomach turn. I quickly changed my password, adding extra security measures to lock the account down. I enabled two-factor authentication, something I should have done long ago. I checked my other accounts, making sure no other information had been tampered with. Everything else seemed normal, yet the unease in my chest only grew. Someone had access to my email, and I had no idea who or why. I copied the unfamiliar address and searched for it online. The results were confusing. There was no house or business registered under that address. It was as if the location did not exist. I switched to satellite view, scanning the area for any sign of what might be there. What I saw sent a shiver down my spine. The address led to an empty lot, surrounded by trees far from any main roads. There were no buildings, no signs of life, just a patch of land in the middle of nowhere. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. Why would someone change my address to a place that did not exist? I checked my email history again, looking for any sign of how this had happened. There were no login alerts, no security warnings. It was as if the change had been made for my own device, yet I knew I had not done it. My fingers tightened around my phone as I considered what to do next. If someone had gained access to my email without triggering any alerts, they were skilled. This was not a simple case of someone guessing my password. Whoever had done this wanted me to see the change, or maybe they wanted me to ignore it. Either way, I could not let it go. I debated calling the authorities, but what would I tell them? There had been no crime, no real evidence that anything had been stolen. All I had was an address that led to nowhere and a sense of unease I could not shake. Still, I knew I could not ignore it. I decided to take a drive to the location, needing to see it for myself. The trip was long, the roads becoming more isolated the closer I got. The trees thickened, the sky growing darker as the sun began to set. My hands tightened around the wheel as I approached the destination. The coordinates led me to a small dirt path barely visible from the road. I hesitated before pulling onto it, my headlights cutting through the growing darkness. The trees seemed to close in around me, and for a moment I considered turning back. But I had come too far to stop now. I drove slowly, my heart pounding with each passing second. The road was rough, filled with potholes and fallen branches. It felt like I was the first person to come here in years. Then, suddenly, my headlights illuminated something in the distance. There was a structure, barely visible through the trees. It was small, almost like a shed, its walls weathered and covered in vines. My breath caught as I pulled closer, my pulse hammering in my ears. I parked the car and stepped out, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the wind. I hesitated before approaching the structure, my footsteps slow and cautious. The door was slightly ajar, its hinges rusted with time. I reached for it, my fingers trembling as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, the darkness swallowing everything. I pulled out my phone, using its light to scan the space. There was nothing inside, just dust-covered floors and empty shelves. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the center of the room was a single envelope, placed neatly on the floor. My name was written on it in my own handwriting. My breath caught as I reached down, my fingers unsteady as I picked it up. I turned it over, hesitating before opening it. Inside was a single piece of paper, the words brief but chilling. The message was a warning, telling me that I had been found. My hands shook as I reread the words, my mind racing with questions. Who had left this for me? How had they known I would come? Panic rose in my chest as I backed away, my instincts screaming at me to leave. I turned and ran to my car, my heart pounding as I fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, the headlights cutting through the darkness once more. I sped back down the path, not daring to look back. When I finally reached the main road, I forced myself to breathe. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Someone had hacked my email, led me here, and left a message just for me. But I still did not know who or why. I drove straight home, locking every door and checking every window. I sat in the darkness, gripping the letter in my hands. Someone had wanted me to see this, to know that they were watching, but they had not harmed me. Not yet. And I did not sleep that night, my thoughts refusing to settle. I changed all my passwords, secured all my accounts, but it did little to ease my fear. The next morning I checked my email again. The address had been changed back to my real one. Whoever had done this was not finished. They wanted me to know they were still there. But if they thought I would sit back and wait, they were wrong. I was going to find out who they were, and I was going to stop them before they made their next move. Story 14. The train was packed with people, the air thick with the scent of too many bodies pressed together. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels against the tracks provided a steady background noise, almost drowning out the hum of conversations. I stood near the door, gripping the overhead rail to steady myself as the train swayed. My mind was elsewhere, lost in the routine of another long commute. It was just another day, nothing out of the ordinary, or so I had thought. As the train slowed at the next stop, the crowd shifted, people jostling for space as new passengers boarded. I barely noticed the brief brush of someone passing too close, their presence lost in the press of bodies. It was only when I reached into my pocket a few minutes later that I felt it. My fingers brushed against a small slip of paper, something that had not been there before. A strange sense of unease crept over me as I pulled it out and unfolded it. The note was hastily written, the ink slightly smudged as if someone had scribbled it in a hurry. The words were brief, but they sent a chill through me. You are in danger. Leave the train at the next stop. My heart skipped a beat as I read it again, trying to make sense of what it meant. I glanced around, searching the faces of the passengers, but no one seemed to be paying me any attention. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to dismiss it as a prank or a misunderstanding. Yet another part of me felt an undeniable sense of dread. My pulse quickened as I considered my options. The next stop was only a few minutes away. If this was some kind of joke, then leaving the train would make me look foolish. But if it was real, if there was an actual danger, then staying could be a mistake. I folded the note and slipped it back into my pocket, my mind racing. The train rattled forward, each second stretching unbearably long. I forced myself to stay calm, to act normal, though my hands had begun to tremble slightly. I scanned the crowd again, looking for any sign of someone watching me, but everyone appeared preoccupied with their own lives. If someone had slipped me the note, they had done so without drawing attention. The next stop approached, and my decision had to be made. I took a deep breath and stepped toward the door, feeling my pulse hammering in my ears. The train slowed, and as soon as the doors slid open, I stepped out, letting the flow of passengers carry me onto the platform. I turned quickly, watching as the train pulled away, wondering if I had just made the right choice or if I had fallen for some strange trick. The station was crowded, people moving in every direction, but nothing seemed unusual. I stepped away from the platform, still gripping the note in my pocket. My mind was a whirlwind of questions. Who had left the note? What danger had I supposedly been in? Was someone still watching me? The sudden feeling of paranoia crept in, making me hyper-aware of every movement around me. I moved toward the exit, trying to decide my next step. Should I go home? Should I report this to someone? A part of me felt foolish, but the other part knew that something was not right. The note had appeared in my pocket without me noticing, and that alone was unsettling. If someone had wanted to harm me, why warn me first? Just as I reached the stairs leading out of the station, I felt it again. The unmistakable brush of someone moving too close behind me. My breath caught, and I turned sharply, my eyes scanning the crowd. A figure in a dark jacket slipped between two people and disappeared into the throng. I could not see their face, but the way they moved sent a new wave of unease through me. I quickened my pace, pushing through the exit and stepping onto the busy street. The city bustled around me, cars honking, people hurrying to their destinations, oblivious to the quiet panic tightening in my chest. I needed to think, to figure out what was happening. The note had warned me of danger, but I still did not know what kind. And now, someone had been following me. I ducked into a nearby coffee shop, needing a moment to collect myself. I ordered something just to have an excuse to sit, my hands still shaking slightly as I reached for the note again. I read it over once more, hoping for some clue I had missed. The words were simple, direct, with no explanation. Whoever had written this had not wanted to waste time. I glanced toward the window, scanning the street outside. My stomach tightened when I saw the same figure from before lingering near the entrance of the station. They were not looking directly at me, but their presence was enough to confirm my fears. Someone was following me. Someone had wanted me off that train. The real question was why. My thoughts raced, trying to make sense of everything. Had I seen something I was not supposed to? Had I unknowingly become involved in something dangerous? I had no enemies, no reason for anyone to target me. But the note had been real, and the person outside was proof that this was not some elaborate prank. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. If someone was watching me, then I needed to stay ahead of them. I could not go home, not yet. I needed to lose whoever was following me and figure out what was really going on. I grabbed my drink and left the coffee shop, blending into the crowd as I moved quickly down the street. I took several turns, weaving through different blocks, checking behind me every so often. Each time, the same figure lingered just far enough away to avoid direct suspicion, but close enough to be following. I knew I had to act fast. I spotted a small alley and ducked into it, pressing myself against the wall, waiting. Seconds passed, and then I saw them. The figure hesitated at the alley entrance, scanning the area. I held my breath, waiting to see what they would do. Then, as if sensing something was off, they turned and disappeared into the crowd. I exhaled slowly, my heart still pounding, but relief washing over me. I pulled the note from my pocket one last time, staring at the words. Whoever had written it had saved me from something, but I might never know what. All I knew was that I had listened, and because of that I was safe. I would always wonder about that moment, about the stranger who had warned me, but I knew one thing for certain. I would never take another crowded train the same way again. Story 15. The day started like any other, with the usual routine of getting dressed and heading out. The city was alive with movement, people rushing past with their own schedules and destinations. I blended into the crowd, walking the familiar streets toward my usual coffee shop. It was a place of comfort, where the scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the quiet hum of conversation. I had never given much thought to the strangers I passed every day, until one of them stopped me. At first, I barely noticed the person standing near the entrance of the coffee shop. Their presence was unremarkable, just another face in the crowd. But as I stepped closer, they turned to me with an expression of recognition. Their eyes locked onto mine, and a slow smile spread across their face. The familiarity in their gaze sent an unexpected chill through me. "Hey," they said with certainty, as if we were old friends. "It has been a long time." I blinked, confusion washing over me. I had never seen this person before. I searched their face for any sign of familiarity, but nothing came to mind. "I am sorry," I said hesitantly. "Do I know you?" Their smile faltered for only a moment before they let out a soft laugh. "Of course you do," they insisted. "We met before. You do not remember." Their confidence unsettled me, as if I was the one making a mistake. My mind scrambled to recall any past meeting, but I came up empty. "I think you have the wrong person," I said, stepping toward the door. But they did not move, blocking my way just slightly. No, I am sure," they said, their voice carrying an edge of certainty. "We spoke right here. You were standing exactly where you are now." The way they said it sent a shiver through me. It was too specific, too assured. I forced a polite smile, trying to ease the tension. "Maybe you met someone who looks like me," I suggested. "A lot of people come through here." But they shook their head, their expression unwavering. "It was you," they said firmly. "I never forget a face." The unease grew stronger, coiling in my stomach like a warning. Something about their persistence felt unnatural, as if they were not just mistaken but determined to make me believe their story. I did not want to be rude, but I needed to get away. "Look, I really do not remember," I said, taking a step back. "I need to go. They watched me closely, their eyes searching mine for something I did not understand. For a brief moment, I thought they might argue further, but then they simply nodded. "If you say so," they murmured, their voice quieter now. "But you will remember. Eventually." The words sent a cold prickle down my spine, but I refused to let them shake me. Without another word, I stepped past them and into the coffee shop. The warmth of the cafe was a relief, the normalcy of the familiar setting grounding me. I ordered my coffee, trying to shake off the strange encounter. As I waited, I glanced out the window, half expecting the stranger to still be standing there. But they were gone, vanished into the crowd as if they had never been there. The interaction should have been easy to forget, just a case of mistaken identity. And yet, the unease lingered. The rest of the day felt strangely off. I caught myself glancing over my shoulder more often than usual, my mind replaying the encounter. The way they had looked at me, the certainty in their voice it gnawed at me. I tried to brush it off, but it clung to me like a shadow. That night, as I got ready for bed, I checked my phone absent-mindedly. A new message sat in my inbox from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it, my breath catching when I read the words, "Do you remember now?" My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. There was no name, no indication of who had sent it, but I already knew. The stranger. Somehow they had found my number. A wave of unease crashed over me as I gripped my phone tightly. I considered ignoring it, pretending I had never seen it. But curiosity and fear warred within me, and before I could stop myself, I typed out a response. "Who is this?" I hit send, my pulse racing. Seconds later, another message arrived. "We met before, you just do not remember yet." A shiver ran through me as I reread the words. This was more than just a chance encounter. This person believed in what they were saying, and now they had found a way to reach me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of what to say. I did not want to engage, but part of me needed answers. "I do not know you," I finally replied. "Stop contacting me." The response came almost instantly. "That is what you think." I locked my phone and set it face down on the nightstand, my hands trembling. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to push the thoughts away. It was probably just a disturbed person, someone fixated on a false memory. They would get bored and move on. Days passed, and no new messages came. Slowly, I convinced myself that it was over. But just as I was beginning to let my guard down, something happened that made my blood run cold. As I was walking home one evening, I stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. A reflection in the glass window of a nearby store caught my eye. My breath hitched as I saw a familiar figure standing across the street. The stranger. They were watching me, standing still among the moving crowd. A slow smile crept across their face as if they knew I had seen them. My chest tightened as panic surged through me. I forced myself to look away, my pulse hammering in my ears. When the light changed, I walked quickly, refusing to look back. I needed to lose them to get home and lock the door behind me. But no matter how fast I walked, the feeling of being watched never faded. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump, every shadow seemed to move. I kept my phone beside me, waiting for another message that never came. The silence was almost worse. The next morning, I made a decision. I would not let fear control me. If this person was trying to scare me, I would not let them win. I reported the messages and the encounter to the authorities, hoping it would put an end to whatever game they were playing. Weeks passed, and the stranger never appeared again. No more messages, no more unsettling encounters. The tension in my chest gradually eased, and life returned to normal. Even so, I never truly forgot. The memory of that encounter lingered, a quiet reminder that some people believe their own truths so deeply that they will do anything to make others believe them too. And sometimes the scariest thing is not knowing if they are right. Story 16. The afternoon was quiet as I walked through town, the streets lined with familiar shops and the occasional passerby. The air was crisp, the kind that hinted at the changing seasons, making me pull my jacket tighter around myself. I had no particular destination in mind, just a simple stroll to clear my thoughts. The city had a way of feeling both busy and empty at the same time, and today was one of those days, where everything seemed to move just a little slower. I glanced into the large display window of a boutique, my reflection staring back at me against a backdrop of neatly arranged mannequins. My steps slowed as I took in the details, the way my coat bunched slightly at the shoulders, the faint exhaustion in my eyes. It was an ordinary moment, something I had done countless times without a second thought. But then I noticed something that made me stop. My reflection had not stopped when I did. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I stood frozen, watching the glass intently. For a brief second, I told myself I had imagined it, that it was just a trick of the light. But as I hesitated, my reflection finally caught up, standing still in perfect alignment with me. My heart pounded in my chest. I lifted my right hand slowly, testing it. The reflection did the same, a flawless mirror image. I swallowed hard, trying to dismiss the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. Maybe I had just been tired, distracted. Maybe my mind had played a trick on me, but something in the back of my mind whispered otherwise. I turned away, forcing myself to keep walking, trying to shake the strange feeling. The streetlights flickered as I passed beneath them, the faint hum of electricity blending with the distant sounds of traffic. I glanced into another store window, unable to resist checking again. This time, my reflection was already waiting for me. A lump formed in my throat as I stared at the glass. My body felt rooted to the spot, my pulse quickening with each passing second. The reflection stood exactly like me, yet there was something unnatural about it. It was subtle, but I could feel it like a presence just slightly off, something that should not be there. I shifted my weight to one side, testing it again. The reflection hesitated for the briefest moment before following. My breath hitched as fear gripped me. This was not normal. This was not possible. I stepped closer to the window, my hands trembling slightly. My own face stared back, but there was something wrong with the eyes. They looked like mine, yet they felt different, as if they belonged to someone else. My skin prickled with unease. Then the reflection smiled. I did not smile. My lips were pressed together in a tight line, my jaw tense. But the reflection, it smiled slow and deliberate. The kind of smile that did not reach the eyes, that carried something unreadable beneath it. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short, rapid bursts. My reflection did not move. It stayed still, that eerie smile lingering as if it was enjoying my fear. The street around me seemed unnaturally quiet now, the distant city sounds muffled, as if I had stepped into a space separate from reality. I turned away, forcing my legs to move, walking quickly down the street. My mind raced, searching for an explanation. Maybe it had been my imagination. Maybe I was overtired, stressed, anything that could make sense of what I had seen. But deep down, I knew that was not the truth. I avoided looking at any more windows, focusing straight ahead. My breath was still unsteady, my hands cold. I just needed to get home, to shake off this feeling, to remind myself that reflections were just that, reflections. But as I turned the corner, I caught a glimpse of movement in another shop window. My stomach clenched as I glanced, unable to stop myself. The reflection was already there, waiting. It was facing me directly, though I had not turned toward the glass. My body was angled away, mid-step, but the reflection stood still, as if it had been expecting me. My hands felt numb as dread settled deep in my chest. I stepped closer, feeling as if I were drawn toward it, as if something unseen was pulling me in. My reflection stared back, its expression neutral now, but the eyes held something else, something knowing. I raised my hand again, but this time I did not move it in a simple wave. Instead, I reached toward the glass. The reflection did not mimic me. It stood still, watching. My fingers hovered inches from the window, my breath shallow. Then it moved. Not like a reflection should, not like a mirror image. It moved first. The hand on the other side reached toward me, perfectly aligned with mine. My body tensed as I fought the urge to move away. It was like a game, a test, something unseen pressing against my mind. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Then, just as my fingertips nearly touched the glass, the reflection's expression changed. The corners of its lips curled up into that same unsettling smile. My chest tightened, my body screaming at me to step back, to run. I turned and bolted. I did not stop. My footsteps echoed against the pavement as I ran, my breath uneven. I did not look at any more windows. I did not want to see if it was still there. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were shaking as I unlocked the door. I stumbled inside, locking it behind me. My home was quiet, safe, untouched by whatever had happened out there. I leaned against the door, trying to calm myself. I told myself I would not check, that I would not look into any more reflections. But as I passed the hallway mirror, my breath caught in my throat. The reflection was already looking at me, and this time it did not move at all. Story 17. The letter arrived without warning, resting on my doorstep like it had been placed there with purpose. There was no return address, no indication of who had sent it. The envelope was plain, unmarked, and sealed shut with a single crease down the middle. Something about it unsettled me before I even opened it. My hands hesitated as I tore the flap, unfolding the paper inside. The message was simple, just a date and a time written in neat, bold handwriting. There were no instructions, no names, no explanation of what it meant. I stared at the numbers for a long time, my mind racing with possibilities. Was this a mistake? Had it been meant for someone else? The longer I held the letter, the more uneasy I became. I checked the calendar, noting that the date was only 2 days away. The time listed was exactly 10 at night. A strange feeling settled in my chest as I tried to make sense of it. There were no other details, no location to go to, no indication of what was supposed to happen. I had never received anything like this before, and it made me feel as if someone was watching me. After a few minutes of debating, I decided to search my house for any signs of intrusion. Every door was locked, every window secured. Nothing was missing or out of place. I even checked my security camera, but the footage showed nothing unusual. The letter had simply appeared at my doorstep, as if left there by an unseen hand. Curiosity mixed with caution as I considered my next move. I could ignore it, throw it away, and pretend it never arrived. But something told me that was not an option. This letter had been sent to me for a reason, and the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to know why. I took a picture of it for reference, then placed it back in the envelope and set it on my desk. The next 2 days passed uneventfully, but the letter never left my thoughts. I kept glancing at it, feeling drawn to the mystery behind it. As the date approached, my unease grew stronger. I told myself it was nothing, that it could be a prank. But deep down, I was not so sure. There was something deliberate about it, something calculated. When the night finally arrived, I sat in my living room, staring at the clock. The numbers slowly crept toward 10, and my heartbeat matched their steady rhythm. I debated whether I should do something, but there was no clear action to take. I did not know where to go or what to expect. All I could do was wait. Then, at exactly 10 p.m., my phone vibrated against the table. The sudden noise sent a jolt through me, and I hesitated before picking it up. There was a message from an unknown number. It contained only one word: look. A cold chill ran down my spine as I turned toward the window. The blinds were closed, but an unsettling feeling told me something was outside. Slowly, I stood up and approached the glass, my hands trembling slightly as I lifted the blinds. The street outside was quiet, the dim glow of the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. But then I saw it. A figure stood across the street, just barely visible in the darkness. They were motionless, facing my house as if they'd been waiting for me to look. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to make out any features, but their face was obscured by the shadows. For several seconds, neither of us moved. My heart pounded as I debated what to do. Should I call the police? Should I step outside? Before I could decide, my phone vibrated again. Another message appeared on the screen. Now you know. The figure across the street turned slowly and walked away, disappearing into the night without a trace. I stood frozen in place, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. What did I know? What had I just witnessed? The presence of the letter, the precise timing, the figure outside it all felt orchestrated, as if someone had planned every moment. But for what purpose? I locked the doors and stayed up for hours, replaying the events in my head. Every sound outside made me tense, every shadow seemed darker than before. The messages had stopped, and no more letters arrived, but the unease remained. It felt like I had been tested, though I did not understand why. The next morning I checked my security camera footage again, desperate for any clues. My hands trembled as I rewound to the moment when the figure had appeared. The recording played back in silence, showing the empty street just minutes before 10 p.m. Then, right as the clock hit the hour, the figure stepped into view. My breath caught as I watched the footage. The person had not approached from the street or walked up from the sidewalk. They had simply appeared, standing still as if they had materialized from nowhere. My pulse quickened as I rewound the video again, watching closely. Each time the same thing happened. 1 second, the street was empty. The next, the figure was there. A deep sense of dread settled over me. There was no logical explanation for what I had seen. The letter, the messages, the figure's sudden appearance had all pointed to something beyond my understanding. I had no idea who had sent the letter or what they wanted from me, but one thing was certain. Someone had chosen me for this, and whatever it was not over yet. Story 18. The morning started like any other. I arrived at the office, coffee in hand, ready to settle into my usual routine. The sound of keyboards clicking and quiet conversations filled the space as I walked to my desk. Everything felt as ordinary as the day before, and I expected nothing out of the ordinary. That assumption quickly changed the moment I sat down. A voice greeted me with excitement, and I turned to see a coworker I had never met before. They smiled warmly, acting as if we had known each other for years. Their eyes lit up as they spoke, recalling moments and conversations that I had no memory of. I hesitated, trying to place their face, but nothing about them was familiar. Confused yet intrigued, I decided to go along with the conversation. They asked about my weekend as if it were a continuation of an earlier discussion. Their tone carried familiarity, like we had shared countless stories before. I responded cautiously, choosing my words carefully so as not to reveal my uncertainty. The last thing